We are on. Okay, so welcome to Skateboarding Creative Cities, Brighton home. Everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
There's people here. Excellent. Just to prove that people are here. So my name's Ricardo. I'm from Brighton Home City Council. Helped organise this event, and then we've got some. Well, we're lucky enough to have some guest speakers with us. We've got Iain Borden here on the left, Professor of Architecture. Give a round of applause. Chris Lawton, Skateboard GB, Skate Nottingham. And then you have myself at the end just talking a bit about local projects. There'll be an opportunity to do question and answer as well at the end. Just a bit about the venue really quickly. So obviously that's the entrance when you came in. Exits there if you want to hop out at any point. In terms of COVID procedures, track and trace is displayed. Masks are optional. Lots of sanitizer around if you want to sanitize. That all sound all good? All happy with that? Excellent, because I know we're running late on time. We'll try and keep this to roughly an hour. I believe Iain's going to chat first. You ready to go?
Ready to go.
All yours, Iain.
Thanks, thanks everyone, thanks for coming. I'm going to be relatively quick. I'm going to give a sort of an overview of what I think some of the challenges are for skateboarding today, and in particular how that gives us with particular challenges with regard to physical facilities and the kinds of things that we can do. I know that Chris and Ricardo, and I think probably quite a lot of you, have been working and are involved with things on the ground and doing things that are more grounded and more detailed than the kind of thing that I'm going to talk about. But I just want to give a sense of the landscape, as it were, that's facing skateboarding. So what you see on the screen is, I think, the kind of attitudes and values of skateboarding that particularly predominated in the 80s and 90s. So you see on get my left and right. On the left, somebody appropriating a pool, a swimming pool, a piece of architecture that was not designed for skateboarding but is being taken over by that skater. And in a way, the same process happening again. This is a picture of one of Wig Warlam's pictures of Jeff Rowley, taking over a piece of everyday architecture, a handrail, not intended for skateboarding, indeed intended for safety, but is now being transformed into an object of risk and reuse. And also with this comes an idea of transgression and risk and danger, and I would also say masculinity. So the picture, particularly you go to skateboarding in the 90s, this is something where it's particularly young men taking over bits of the world, bits of the architecture not meant for them, and doing something risky with it and getting bloodied and battered as they in that process. And these are incredibly important values in the history of skateboarding. And then, this is incredibly crude, but as an overview, things change through the 2000s and in the 2010s. Or one perhaps could say that kinds of values that have always been present in skateboarding, but have perhaps bubbled more below the surface, start to come to the fore. So again, on the left, we see a DIY skatepark. This is a small little DIY facility near where I live in southeast London. It only lasts about 2 or 3 months. Very crude. But it's about the idea that skaters can then build their own terrains, express themselves through building their own architecture. And then, of course, we also see this in the middle with that incredible kind of creativity, artistic creativity, entrepreneurial creativity that you see with skateboarding: art, film, photography, music, brands, retail, and so on. And then the picture on the right is something very different, which is just one example, that's what happens to be in Jordan, of all that kind of social enterprise where skateboarding is increasingly being used not just as a destination in itself, but a journey somewhere. So that skateboarding is through lessons, through associations, through community groups, is used to impart values of confidence, creativity, to reach youth, inclusivity, in a way that I think was always kind of present in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, but has now become much more common. And we see this in all over the world, and the work that Chris and Skateboard GB and lots of other groups have been doing is absolutely part of this. So these are other kind of values. And I would say that this is one of the big changes in skateboarding, therefore, that if you come at this from the perspective of an urban manager, this is a problem. That this is people doing things that, quote unquote, that they shouldn't, in places that they're not allowed, doing things that are risky and dangerous. So from an urban manager's point of view, this is often perceived to be, rightly or wrong, a problem. This kind of stuff is being perceived as a solution or an answer or a contribution. It's being perceived as one of the ways in which skateboarding can positively contribute towards society. So that's a complete reversal of narrative in the position that skateboarding has in relation to social cities over the course of the last 20 or 30 years or so. And then the other thing, of course, we've just witnessed is an increasing sportification of skateboarding. So we've just seen skateboarding in the Olympics. Obviously, skateboarding has always had competitions as part of it. In the 1960s, it was already on national television in America. There have been competitions throughout skateboarding, but this, as we've obviously seen recently, it's the first time that we've seen skateboarding in the Olympics, and we're starting to see facilities built and constructed and run with that kind of model in mind. And you could argue that that kind of stuff is very contrary to the kind of grassroots, community, creative expression that skateboarding has within its own cultures. So there's a question there of where this sits, and with this as well is that obviously the building of purpose-built facilities for skateboarding, like we have outside in the level in just about every city worldwide. So I was interviewed last week by the Evening Standard newspaper in London, and their question was all about how do we replicate the Sky Brown success, and recognising the fact that it's the Evening Standard is a London newspaper, so it's particularly interested in London. Their question was, where are we going to get this kind of facility built in London, and where is the talent pathway and the competitions and the success ladder that will generate skateboarders to move from this kind of facility to being the next Sky Brown, the next Olympic medal winner. And of course we all know that that is not the only narrative within skateboarding. For some skateboarders that's very important, for some, many, most, it is not. So the question, it seems to me, is how do you start to have all these things alongside each other? How do you have something that is transgressive, something that is creative, something which has the possibility perhaps of being a competitive sport, but these things can all exist alongside each other? So just a few sort of possible suggestions as to how this works. But it's also a sports facility in the sense that it's purpose designed and meant for skateboarding. So skate parks are great, but they're not the only answer or the only solution to our conundrum of how do we develop skateboarding culture in relation to the spaces of the city. So a few others. Well, one, again, staying in this case in London, the undercroft underneath the South Bank Centre actually is a place which is not designed for skateboarding, although it's been modulated and attenuated for skateboarding. And I'm sure many people know there was a big campaign to make sure to keep it by Long-Lived South Bank and other people to make sure that it maintained its open access right about 7 or 8 years ago. And that was a very successful campaign. I don't want to go into the details of that, but this seems to me to be an example of where skateboarding as community activism can be buried right in the heart of the city. One of the things I would say, just very interestingly about this is 150,000 people signed the petition around that to keep skateboarding. Now on one level they were supporting skateboarding, but I think what they were also doing was making a protest about how they want the public spaces of the city to be. So the proposal was to turn these into food retail opportunities, you know, buy cappuccino and sushi and other things there. And what a lot of people that supported skateboarding saying now were staying in this location. On one level supporting that, but they were also saying is we don't want all our cities to turn into a kind of retail mall or into another food or coffee opportunity. Those things are great, I'm sure we all like them occasionally, but that's not how we want all our public spaces to be. So in a way what the skateboarding did here was raise the question, in a way acted as a kind of shock troop, if you like, of asking the question of what do we want our public spaces to be. Just some other examples. I think Chris may give an example of this as well. This is back to the idea of a skate park, but this is much more of a community-oriented affair. It was first built in the 1980s. It's in London. It's called Hackney Bumps. It's actually, I think, built as a BMX facility to begin with, but has been taken over, if you like, by a community group who have skimmed back the surface, built new ramps along the outside, made it more skateboardable, but in a way taking it over as a community facility. Other things that people do is run events. So this is one that I was involved in. I'm a lecturer at University College London, and we worked with the Smithsonian Institute to run a one-day event called InnoSkates a couple of years ago now, where outside one of our buildings we had a few small ramps that were designed by one of our civil engineer students, a guy called Ricardo, who now does a lot of engineering for skateparks and other ramps, and invited skateboarders to take over the space for a day. Also, one of the things that was most interesting about this was there was quite a strong effort made to make adaptive riders come and use that space for the day. So Dan Mancino, the blind skateboarder, came over from America, as did Oscar Loretto, who has a prosthetic limb, Lily Rice, and some of the WCMX riders as well, that you see here. And that was quite an interesting and transformative event, and I'll come back to it, particularly from my university, about how its public spaces might get used. So again, just 2 more slides. Another example, therefore, of how this public space and skatable space might work. This is one of the water squares in Rotterdam. So this is a space which is not in any way intended for skateboarding or only for skateboarding. It's actually a part of the city that can be flooded at different times of the year. But nonetheless, it's sort of designed with the idea that at some times you might get skateboarders in the mix. So it's not a skate park, it's just a multivalent, multi-purpose public space where skateboarding is wrapped into the mix. And then just one last slide. So my university, again University College London, we're developing a new campus on the Olympic site in London, and the university wants to make that site as open and inclusive as possible, not just to academic students and academic people, staff like myself. So the question is, how do we make particularly the spaces between the buildings inclusive and welcoming? So as part of that, we've got a project being run by Esther Sayers and Sam Griffiths called City Mill Skate, which is working with local youth to design skate dots, small skateboardable objects. And the intention is that when the buildings are open and the campus is open, that various of these skate dots will be interspersed, dotted around in between the buildings. And that's obviously good for skateboarding, but it's also good for my university, because it's, in a way, it's using skateboarding as a way to engage with the local community and to bring the public onto its site. And we're also hoping that some of these skate docks will be placed around the rest of the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park site as well. Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's just to give you a bit of an overview of I think, of some of the big challenges that I think skateboarding's facing, and I think we're going to hear a bit more detail from Chris and then Ricardo about it later. Chris, over to you.
Thank you. Just put my slide. Got it.
I've decided to inhabit the cliche of a dull economist and make slides that are a lot less interesting and attractive than Iain's. So, you will be forgiven for not knowing who I am. You should all know Iain Borden is. I'm Chris Lawton. I've got a few weird job titles. Recently started with Skateboard GB as their community development officer. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And perhaps I was offered that job because of the work that I did with Skate Nottingham, which is one of the older social or charitable or morally driven skate projects that started after Long and South Bank. After Long and South Bank showed us that skateboarders could win, but we wouldn't always lose, we wouldn't always be the underdogs, as did Malmö, as did other cities in Europe. A number of projects started in the UK that were quite ambitious, and Skate Nottingham was one of them. And I've also been an economist at Nottingham University for a while, not anymore. I'm really following, and when Ricardo, Iain and I had a chat beforehand, Iain had this really nice analogy that in the 90s he was being contacted by urban planners, urban managers, around how, as the foremost historian of skateboarding, how would he recommend we get skateboarders out of our darn cities? And now, how do we get skateboarders into our cities? The idea that skateboarders are solutions to challenges. So we'll talk a little bit about what those challenges might be. When we started with Skate Nottingham back in 2016, a couple of people were very generous with their time. Stu McClure from Long and South Bank, and also Gustav Eden from Malmö, Skate Malmö and Bryggeriet. And Gustav said, if you're going to start a kind of a transformative project in your city, you've got to stop thinking like a skateboarder purely in that kind of quite entitled way of thinking, how can I make my city better for skateboarding? You've got to start thinking about how skateboarding can make your city better. How is skateboarding the solution to the challenges that your municipality is facing? So we're going to think about those. And as time has gone on, as the last 5-6 years has rolled on, the sort of challenges that skateboarding can be the answer to have become really quite prevalent. So we're going to have a look at some of those challenges. We'll look at some successful cities that have done skate urbanism well, and then we're going to look at how we might do that sort of thing in the UK, and how Skateboard GB are coming along and trying to help. So a little bit of the background, just to try and, I'm not going to spend very long on this, and lots of wordy slides. I'm more than happy to send them to you all. My email is chris@skateboardgb.org. Hopefully these can be some kind of resource packs for helping you in doing what you're needing to do. But we can conceive skateboarding as a lot of things, which makes it useful to be seen as a lot of solutions to challenges. We can see skateboarding as a creative practice. These guys, these Kilberth and Jürgen Schwer, call it a movement practice. It's something that isn't just a sport. It can be a healthy activity to do with your time. It's also extremely unhealthy, as many of us have experienced in our lifetimes. It has a low financial barrier, which means that people that may be excluded from mainstream sports can be included in skateboarding, a way of inclusive urban development. And we'll have a look at how some cities fail to include some of their residents consistently and maybe more significantly over time. Skateboarders can be highly motivated, called collectivist action. We can also be very individualist, so there's a lot of tension in any social skateboarding project between skaters who want to go their own way and skaters who want to do things together. pretty resilient and adaptable, entrepreneurial, aware of heritage and creating shared heritage, shared identity in an urban space. So we can start helping cities with what's called placemaking, projecting a sense of authentic identity. And we can see with what we might call neoliberalism, that idea of towns that are being McDonaldized, that become increasingly similar. We can create this idea of authentic identity that can be a valuable asset for cities. And I can talk about what cities are and aren't a load of times. Let's have a look at the problems cities are facing. These are some depressing stats now. So this stat is gross value added. This is the dominant way of expressing in capitalism how valuable a place is or how valuable an economy is. That line you've got at the top, the yellow line, is Manchester. Manchester is one of the biggest, wealthiest economies in the UK in terms of the value created by its economy. See where that yellow line is. The red line is the UK. The next line down, the orange line, is Nottingham. Nottingham is the fourth largest urban economy in the UK. It's about £10 billion worth of value created. So Manchester, £35,000 per head is created in value every year. Nottingham is about £30,000 per head. So people in Nottingham are creating £30,000 of value per head. The next chart is income. That's income that goes back to the household sector. And you see the chart is reversed. The two biggest urban economies have the lowest household income. Nottingham, in fact, has the lowest household income of anywhere bar nowhere in the UK. So it's a large, wealthy city, 10 billion economy, and it has the lowest household income bar nowhere in the UK. So this idea that cities that are wealthy, cities that have got big economies, may well not be working for the people that live there. What else might not be working? So your cities are centres of amenities. People travel into cities to go to leisure centres, to go to swimming pools, to go to public parks. But people that live in cities are more likely to be inactive than people that don't live in cities, the people that don't have access to those sort of amenities. So Birmingham, for example, 36.2% of the population of Birmingham are doing less than 30 minutes of physical activity a week, significantly above the national average. People die earlier in cities, despite the amenities, despite the presence of professional jobs, despite the presence of universities, despite the easy access to hospitals, for example. So stunningly, the life expectancy of birth for the average male might be just below 80, and for the average woman might be just above 83. If you live in Manchester, it's just over 76 for a man and just over 80 for a woman. So you're dying 3 years on average if you're a woman earlier, and if you're a man, you're dying almost 4 years earlier if you live in Manchester, one of the richest cities in the UK. Personal well-being, how we might measure happiness, life satisfaction, etc., all tend to be lower in cities than they are elsewhere in the country. And we've been trying to, my job, I used to work for government. I was still a dirtbag skateboarder by the weekend and in the evening, and I felt I was actually doing a lot more for urban development as a skateboarder than I was as a civil servant. It made me a very unhappy civil servant. But ever since World War II, we've been doing similar things in cities. We've been trying to build them up as centres of services, centres of retail, centres of labour, effectively centres of consumption, and a development-fuelled, a property development-fuelled development trajectory. And since 2015, this has just been not working very well at all. So we've been seeing a decline in retail, decline in retail footfall. We've been seeing a decline in employment in some of the largest service sectors. As we've seen since COVID, it's exacerbated all of this. Empty offices, for example. High streets are just pockmarked with empty retail spaces. Cities are often, except for London, net exporters of graduates. They suck in young people to go to university, and they lose them again when young people finish university. And cities are trying to address these challenges now, contemporary policies, by the same kind of things, creative and cultural strategies. Most cities have got a creative quarter. Nottingham has, I'm sure Brighton has. The idea of talking about innovation, enterprise, creativity, sustainability, all these development trajectories that are trying to not make the same mistakes of the past. But we're still very development driven. So if this idea of a developer driven urban development, a retail driven urban development is the thing that hasn't been working, what might things that might work look like? What might skate friendly cities look like? There's been a lot of amazing research. I've cited some of it up there. Iain's obviously a big figure in all of that. Some lesser known people, Nico Kiravita in Tampere, Paul O'Connor and Brian Glennie, Sharon Dickinson in Manchester and Liverpool. But what is skate friendliness? As skateboarders, we're often focused on the space we skateboard in, the skate park, etc. But the idea of what's been achieved by cities like Malmö and Bordeaux is much wider than that. It's a deliberate city-wide enabling and centering of youth-focused activity, going far beyond creating a skate park or skate spaces. It's about doing what the Long Live Southbank crew did, around challenging what our city's there to do. The purposive creation of amenities for outdoor public activity that can be many different things, the breaking down of barriers between the skate park and wider public realm, the creation of opportunities for skateboarders to work in skateboarding and do the kind of activism that we've all been seeing. It's seeing municipal support, so the council, alongside the entrepreneurialism and the commercial activity of skateboarders. So Malmö is a great example. We often focus on Bryggeriet, the indoor skate park, or maybe the awesome outdoor skate parks. But Malmö is Bryggeriet, who's also an NGO. They're a school. They build skate parks. They're an event organisation, they're a development organisation, alongside Skate Malmö, which is the joint venture with Malmö City Council. Polar, of course, Poetic Collective, Post Hats and Details, Street Lab Skate Shop, all that inward investment from Vans, Nike and Converse. There's loads of stuff going on in Malmö, above and beyond Bryggeriet, and it's a 20-year story that the city of Malmö has invested significantly in. So Gustav would remind us that we're not just looking at the skate park or the DIYs, the cool things that we can visit as skateboarders, we're looking at the institution that they've created to make that happen. I'm going to come back to that. This shows all that stuff that goes on in these successful skate-friendly cities. And you can see that yourself. And looking at these things, you can also ask yourself, how many cities in the UK are all or most of these things prevalent in or present in? Yeah, Brighton is a really rad city to be a skateboarder. Nottingham is a pretty rad city to be a skateboarder. Manchester is, Bristol is, London is of course, Leeds is pretty good, Sheffield is pretty good. But none of those places have all of these things that you see in Northern European cities like Malmö, Copenhagen, Tampere in Finland, Borden, the kind of holistic, job-creating, value-creating activity. Actually, Brighton have done that with Ricardo. Yeah, one of the very few parts of the UK that have actually generated roles and that constant engagement with the municipality. So Brighton are a little bit above the curve. But Malmö have used this advantage to create pilots of how you might do this in other cities. So this is something that happened in Malmö in 2019. You see Harry Lintel doing a tray flip. You see Palomino and Nick in the background. Our mate Bambi wandering around over there. Loads of activity that happens in Malmö every year. And we're trying to do similar in Nottingham, trying to take over unloved spaces, or actually this is by a city. This is an innovation hub. This is where people can create replicable life science innovations and try and scale it up in the most deprived ward of Nottingham. So it's an employment centre that most people in Nottingham will never work at. And we did a big skate jam there. We got people from all walks of life having a skate there. The idea of purposive engagement of women and girls, all of these cities are doing that. But coming back to those, again, a wordy slide, more of a resource for later use. Think about what the benefits of doing this are, linking back to those challenges at the start. So cities are in a real bad pickle at the moment. The government had to commission a report to say, London's actually all right. London isn't in terminal decline because it was looking like it might be at various points during the COVID-19 crisis. But cities in the UK are obviously having a tough time, particularly cities like Nottingham, cities like Manchester, cities like Leeds and Sheffield. Those cities have been hit by deindustrialisation and a reduction in local authority resources. What might being skate friendly bring about that can help address those issues? Well, skateboarding is pretty good for health and well-being. It's great for educational engagement. In Nottingham, we kind of perceive ourselves as engaging with young people who might not be unemployed, but they're underemployed. Smart kids in dumb jobs. So how can we connect young people that have got loads of ideas and loads of skills with job opportunities in places like BioCity, in the city's growing creative and cultural quarter? So the idea of employability. I'm going to say a little bit about Skatepark now. Rocking their livery on my chest. Because what they've done has been really smart. Starts out as a DIY project, jumps into part of a wider regeneration of post-industrial part of the city. The skaters are involved in pouring concrete, they're involved in putting wood together, so they don't just know how to make skate parks. So they're building saunas for the city. They start doing public works. The idea of creating a wider octopus that has its tentacles in all different parts of the city's creative and cultural regeneration. Because if you're a skateboarder, Mark Fisher once said, if you really like music, you don't just like music. If you just like music, you don't really like music. If you really like skateboarding, you don't just like skateboarding. You like lots of other things related to skateboarding. So we can do a lot of cool things with that. We can create pride of place and heritage, educational and career routes. We can create what's known, in the words of Jane Jacobs, eyes on the street. The idea of we can make places safe. Skateboarders occupy space. Skateboarders, as Iain demonstrated, skateboarders can co-opt space. In the 90s we saw that as unsafe, but now we look at that more closely, we can see it as making that space safe. So if you think about the things that are genuinely unsafe, drug transactions, mugging, street crime, etc. Tampere again have been really, really progressive in this. Skateboarders occupying that space make that space safer for non-skaters. Ocean Howell told a very powerful story of how that worked out in Love Park. Stanton Market, the main skate spot in Nottingham, there's been a number of instances where women have walked through late at night. It's a pretty empty, cavernous space. It's by Nottingham's most disadvantaged ward. There's been a couple of instances where women have walked through Stanton Market and picked up a tail. A man starts following them. The skaters see it, they walk over to the lone woman, they pretend to be someone that she knows, and they escort her till she's off that space, and the tail clears off. The idea of the skaters are being there and they're responsibly occupying that space and they're making that space safe for people who might face all kinds of aspects of unsafeness. People who might be non-male, non-white, non-heteronormative, and might experience additional barriers. So skateboarders can be good custodians of the space. And they can not be sometimes. So us as activists are often fighting skateboarding as much as we're fighting the municipality. How can we get skateboarding to live up to its potential to be good custodians of space? It means having a lot of arguments with white middle-aged men on Instagram. As a white middle-aged man, I can say all that, I think. And in the UK, we're at an early stage of this. The city of Hull did a lot of good stuff around its time as being a city of culture, but arguably that perhaps didn't really take on in a way that was sustainable. So coming back to what Gustav said right at the start, the most important thing is the institutions that we build, not just the spots, the things that can go on beyond individuals. Ricardo grafting away in Brighton, David Palmer grafting away in Newcastle and the wider northeast. Individuals can burn out. Institutions can be sustainable. Different kind of strategies. What works in one city might not work elsewhere. We're pretty good in Nottingham in engaging kids who've been disengaged from mainstream education and employment. Told back to the city, demonstrated it in cold hard stats, they were less than interested in it. What they were really interested in is we made the city look cool. All of this sort of stuff. Made that picture at the top right, our mate Finn, BioCity, that ended up in the Atlantic. That ended up in Newsweek Japan. So we made the city look cool. So the strategy that worked in Nottingham was placemaking. The strategy that might work in another city might be creating secure spaces. Chris Giamarino, a friend who's a PhD student in UCLA, has wrote an incredible article with a colleague around different discourses. How the discourse of security didn't work in New York, in saving Brooklyn banks, and the discourse of creativity and entrepreneurialism worked in the LA courthouses. So different strategies work in different cities. So finally, and in my last minute, talking about what Skateboard GB are trying to do. So we've got a little bit of, well, quite a generous amount of capital investment from mortgage lender Habito to try and make these micro interventions in multiple spots around the UK, particularly England, particularly cities that are facing challenges, to try and identify demonstrator projects that we can all learn from. But we can link things together, we can build that institutional capacity. Because Skateboard GB currently is just 5 or 6 of us. Pretty soon it's going to be 6 or 7 of us, which is rad. If anyone's interested, there's a job going at the moment. But we can't do very much with that relatively small resource. So we need strong, sustainable, resilient, capable local partners dotted all over the country. So it's a project that's going to try and help strengthen those kind of projects. So currently we work with Hackney Bumps, Bournemouth DIY, Skate Southampton, and because lots of projects could potentially be supported with quite a small amount of resource, we've got to have a criteria. What is likely to have the biggest impact? Is there user demand? Of course there is in all 3 of those projects. Is there likely to create value for money, not just for Habito and their investment, their capital investment, but also for those communities themselves? Is there availability of land? The Skate Southampton have got this incredible project of skate sculptures, making underutilised spaces really, really lively. But there's a little bit of the question of where they're going to put these spaces, these sculptures. Is there a viable political context? Is the municipality going to say yes? Can there be an equitable spread across the country? The North East and the North West, Cornwall, as well as the South East and the Greater London area? Is there a range of different sort of sites? Portsmouth, an incredible project, occupying a former retail space, different kinds of interventions that we can look at. Is there user capacity to do something cool with that space? A partner that we can work with. Is there a risk? Might this not work out? Is there a reason for Skateboard GB getting involved? Strategic added value. Might it happen anyway without our intervention? So Hackney, for example, the things those guys, all those men and women did, was absolutely incredible. We'll illustrate that in a moment. Can we communicate its potential more widely and inspire other projects all over the country? So that's Hackney. Iain shows you a little bit about that at the moment. Those guys, a few square metres a day during their lockdown, literally sanded that space from being almost unrideable to being incredibly smooth. They've created from a fairly underused space a vibrant community facility. Bournemouth DIY, a less well-known story, but very, very similar, will be the country's first officially designated skate park that was DIY built. They've created an allotment, they've created disabled access, they've created a tree-lined area that's re-greening a formerly dilapidated bit of the urban commons, and a really, really good skate space, RIP Hem. So next steps of getting more skate-friendly spaces around the country, or spaces that can be truly skate-friendly in terms of that wider definition, because we ain't got any quite yet, none at quite that level of holistic city-wide impact. You know, one of the biggest things we've got to do is make sure people aren't burning out. So that well-being contribution. How do we join people up? How do we support organisations to support one another? Because the industry sure ain't doing it at the moment, the skate industry. The idea that you're fighting skateboarding as much as you're fighting local authorities and trying to achieve some of these things. Many of you won't have heard of Shreva North. Shreva North has been going for donkey's years, doing amazing things in the North East. Many people haven't heard of Skate Southampton. Skate Southampton are freaking awesome. These stories are not being told. These projects are not being supported by skateboarding. and they are led by skateboarders doing incredible things. As I said, Skateboard GB can't deliver our strategy alone, so we need strong, sustainable, capable local partners. And this means learning from one another, facilitating that collaboration and that mutual support. So we'll be looking at a next wave of projects, and we'll be very keen to support Lewis, just down the road, and a DIY project there, as well as Portsmouth, Manchester, more projects in the North East. And working really at a national level to try and change that UK skate discourse, to try and get more interest, more support for projects like this. And all of us, I'm sure, are very hopeful the Skateboarders Companion are going to be a game changer in achieving that celebration of grassroots work. And finally, the idea that Skateboard GB, we're going to have to do a lot more to prove the point to government and local government. I think that's all I want to say. I'm a little bit over time, so I'm super keen to hand over to Ricardo and answer any of your questions afterwards.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chris and Iain. Do you want to give another round of applause? Thank you for your expertise. If you do have questions online on the YouTube channel, Brighton Home Healthy Lifestyles team, please do type some questions in, and we'll do Q&A in a minute. So as we're a little bit over time, I'll keep mine reasonably bright and breezy. Some of you will know me in the room. As Chris was saying, I'm lucky enough to have a job in Brighton Home as what's called a Skatepark development officer, which doesn't mean I develop skateparks. It's a bit misleading, but at the same time, I kind of do. So that's kind of on a sports development tack of getting young people involved in skateboarding. So we deliver programs across the city for disadvantaged groups, less represented groups. Got a bunch of coaches and mobile skate park ping around. Much like these guys have got some different hats. So I used to be a director of Skateboard England, worked for 4 years. Now still work for Skateboard GB in the capacity of coaching coaches. And then just a general all-round skateboard activist. And my part of this really is just to rally the troops in Brighton Home and see if I can get some of you guys involved in making some of these projects happen. Because it's not something I can do on my own. I can join the dots all the time. But it'd be great to get some community capacity going. So I was just going to do a really quick sort of past 10 years of Brighton and Hove and things that have gone on since I've been working in my post I've got involved with, and that's working with the community in Lewis, the park project you were saying, in Brighton. Some of the people that worked on the projects are actually in the room. So you all know the Skatepark, which is next to the venue today. That's how it used to look when it was built 10 years ago, brand spanking new. And that was developed by what was called the Brighton Hove Skateparks Association, or the BHSA. And then that took around about 3 years or so to get done. And that was a really quite strong community group at the time to design that park. And then the BHSA did some other things, did some small events, got a pot of money to run some jams every year. They still hold a bank account. There's still technically a chair and a treasurer and a secretary. And my job is to try to rally the troops to get BHSA going again and do some projects in Brighton, as could be done in other cities. Another one I did, which was up the road, which is the old Lewis, was something I did outside of my job in Brighton. And I started a small community group with Skate Lewis at the time, so I was the chair. We put in a bid for some money. We were successful. We got 20 grand, and that allowed us to build what was the Skate House DIY, which was a load of rubble on the left, which is all piled by Brighton skaters, Lewis skaters, Sussex skaters. The concrete poured, polished, finished. Survived for about 6 years, but it shows what you can do with just a small amount of activism and getting everything, your situation together to work with local authorities when they give you a unit to do something like that. And Lewis now has a new one coming. Sadly, that was knocked down by the local authority, and it's now looks worse than the one on the left. And it's just a big pile of rubble, unused, which was laid out for housing. Some of you will know this, which was also off a Red Bull campaign, Red Bull DIY. Great skate park built by community activists again in Brighton. Sadly destroyed by local authorities. So part of this conversation is trying to create that bond between skate activists, skate groups, local authorities to make these places sustainable, like you were just mentioning, Chris, and have some DIY parks that may survive. Some of you may be aware of the Pig City label, Brighton being known for being chased around by police quite a lot, not many places to skate. Hopefully that's got a bit better over the years. More recently, Brighton's installed amazing, really long ledges for skaters to skate, not designed for skateboarders. Skateboarders saw them, and obviously it was Christmas in terms of street skateboarding. The minute they cottoned onto this, they put skate stoppers on them to stop them skating. And eventually, after various conversations, it came back to me, and it just took one of those basic conversations to say it's better to work with skateboarders, work with the community to get rid of these skate stoppers and actually let them skate. And they were fully receptive as a local authority, and they're up for listening to the skaters, but the skaters need a voice, which is why I'm trying to get this BHSA thing going again. Because for now, those skate stoppers are now gone. The ones that have been removed have left them. They're not going to replace them. They're happy to work with the skate park community rather than more skate stoppers, more hype, or growth. So just another example to Brighton seafront of, on the left, stop skateboarding, on the right, create skateboarding, and you have local authorities versus skateboarders. And it's about, for me, trying to stop that going around in those circles of skaters are trouble, which they're not, and they are good people to work with. They do create good space, engage space, make spaces active, and often much safer. Again, other people in the room have helped design this. Again, that was something I did in my own time with Iain, that's in the room from Brighton Youth Centre. So all these things are possible to create conversations with local authorities to get skateparks done up and redone. Equally, East Brighton and Moulscombe, this was done with the community. I just helped them write a consultation. Those statistics went towards a new housing development, and now Moulscombe will be getting a new skatepark for the next 3 to 4 years. It just takes people around to have those conversations. Equally with Lewis, which is coming up soon, and looks like Skateboard GB are gonna support. And as Chris was saying, there's various groups around. So the BHSA started 10 years ago. Skate Nottingham, top left, which is Chris is part of, has been going how long, Chris? I don't know how long.
Since 2016.
Since 2016, so fair few years. And then Skate Suffolk's more of a recent one, of which I've trained pretty much all those volunteers to be skateboard coaches recently. They're delivering free skateboarding in Suffolk, and that's oversubscribed. And then, as you mentioned, Skate Southampton, Longwood South Bank, you've both spoken about. Ealing's another example. But these guys are working with the local authorities, working with Skateboard GB to make things happen. So, lastly, just to sort of wrap up from a Brighton point of view, on the 4th of October, so a couple of weeks' time, in this room, I'll be hopefully chairing a little meeting to get some Brighton people back involved. If you guys are keen to do some projects in Brighton, look at opportunities, get involved with the design of Moulscombe, possible plans for Hove Lagoon. There is some pots of money around possibly for some skatable objects that we can put in situ and do a bit of an experiment in Brighton, some social spaces. So yeah, that's my invite to you to use the city, and those watching online. Let's say these community groups are great and really valuable and worth being part of. So hopefully, I'd love to see you there. Q&A. Any questions from you guys about anything that's been talked about today, or getting involved in Brighton? Iain?
I've got a question for Chris, but I'm not quite sure how to word it, so it might just come out of nonsense. But I guess what would you say, or have you come across any, okay, actually come back to me, because I need to
You can be as rude as you like, well, I've got no self-esteem at all, so you can...
No, it wasn't. Yeah, I guess it was more aimed at you. What would be your advice to kind of skaters who are kind of not active in the scene. Have you, I guess, doing all these things, have you come across any issues kind of caused by, or kind of barriers caused by the skaters themselves in the way that they kind of conduct themselves in these public spaces? And what would be your advice to kind of people that aren't active in this, progression of the skate scene, but just want to be kind of positive, contribute an ally to it, I guess?
I mean, I think that's a great question. I think there's probably two questions, and please correct me if I'm wrong in kind of organising that in my head. So first of all, skaters are, we're a subset of society. So I hope there are more amazing, inspirational human beings in skateboarding proportionately than wider society. That's certainly been my lucky experience, but there's also some people who are difficult, and there's people who've had difficult lives, some of whom skateboarding will be a transformational thing that they do. The amazing Carl Beachy, often writes for Jenkin, he's got a book out at the moment, had a term like skateboarding saves who it saves, and it sort of chews up or burns out who it burns out. So there can be people that we meet and interact with who might not represent the best of us, and that might be for good reasons. They might be vulnerable, but when seen in front of a public plaza, long story short, they could be skaters who act like dicks, and that becomes a kind of collective problem. And that's it. That happens in Malmo, that happens in Bordeaux, that happens in Tampere. And none of these places have the idealised population to work with. And as you said, not everyone is active in this kind of activism. So I think there's a few things we can do there. People like, I'm over 40, I've got some privileges. I did a government job that gave me some of the skills that enable me to think like this and see the world in connections between a challenge and a possibility. I kind of knew how to go about starting up a social enterprise. So I'm quite privileged and lucky in that. And I'm really weird and quite like doing this sort of stuff. Not everyone's like that. So how do I use my privilege to make it easier for people that might want to be engaged in that kind of activism to get engaged? That's challenge one. And people that don't look like me, people that aren't male, that aren't heteronormative, that aren't white. So we're getting activism from people that are more representative of our increasingly diverse community. And challenge two is, how do you keep those people engaged? Because this shit is hard. It burns you out. All of these organisations that I've seen recently, people have been saying, I don't know how long I can keep on doing this. How do we make it less hard and more appealing? Some of that comes around to getting more resources and creating jobs, getting brothers and sisters paid. There is value being created here, so there is no dishonour in some of that being paid work, making it easy, more accessible for people to get involved in activism. Volunteering is often a middle-class phenomenon. So if we're always reliant on volunteering, it's always going to be older, professional, middle-class people doing it. So it's not everyone getting involved in activism and involved in community organising is often not the fault of the people. We're not creating these attractive, supportive community organising opportunities. So we collectively, as a social skate community, need to be better at creating paid work. And Skateboard GB is really keen to work out ways that we might create that. And again, the skate industry has to step up and get more collaboration, more partnerships in making those kind of paid opportunities, because they're sure as hell getting value out of the work that we're doing. Coming back to what do we do about skateboarders who behave like dicks and sometimes threaten the stuff that we create, that comes back down to representation. Me as a 43-year-old guy is less able to bollock a kid who's behaving badly than someone who's a couple of years older than them and someone who's from perhaps their background. So representation and greater representation in skateboard activism will make it a lot easier to ensure that we're living up to our potential to be creating a nurturing, humane community.
Thanks, Chris. Any other questions in the room? I think I've got one online, perhaps, but it might be relevant to you again, Chris, with Skateboard GB, your Skateboard GB out on, if you can take another one on.
Dime out.
So it's from Ashley. It says, what provision is there planned for 9 to 12-year-old age group to help them enter skateboarding as a sport? Do you have any feedback about that from the Skateboard GB point of view and sort of plans?
I think there's 2 or 3 answers there. Really quickly, because I've already taken up too much of yours time. It depends what that 9 to 12-year-old wants to do. So in terms of a better experience of being a beginner than someone my age, you know, I started skating at Old Market Square in Nottingham. The good skaters spat on the floor in front of the groms, like make it very clear that we had to bleed before we were accepted. That stuff doesn't happen anymore. You know, you go to a skate park, the chances are a good skater is going to be lovely to you. And this phenomena that we now have of coached, supported experience of beginner skateboarding. So, you know, the Get Rolling qualification, which Ricardo and others are rolling out to skate coaches, means every city, town, county that you can think of will have a skate coach of some kind who is accessible and making that provision available, that provides that safe, nurturing introduction to skateboarding. So for a beginner, younger skateboarder, there's that. Also safeguarding, they can be pretty confident that they're going to be, the parent is going to be putting that person in contact with a responsible adult. And this professionalisation of skate coaching is something that we're seeing. Indoor skate parks provide that safe environment, and coaching within outdoor skate parks and other spaces provide a much safer environment for children. We don't have to have that school of hard knocks thing that my generation grew up with, which meant less people with the privilege of being male and able-bodied. It's very, very easy to be nostalgic about saying, yeah, we all had to be tough as fuck back in the day to start skateboarding, but that meant only certain people could start skateboarding. In terms of if that 9 to 12-year-old is abundantly skilled and far beyond a beginner skater, and wants to be thinking about a trajectory that might be into competitive skateboarding or sponsored skateboarding, these scene hubs are there to support that. So currently there are 4 of them. Let's see if I can do this. Mount Hawk, Flow, Bay 66 and Greystone in Manchester. There will be more. That project is just a pilot at the moment with 4. And their job is to work on a regional basis and create a talent pathway for high potential skateboarders. And I'm sure we'll be seeing that those kind of skateboarders that are going to the Olympics will be increasingly relatively young, particularly for women and girls. We really saw that with Sky Brown and Bombette Martin's cohort. So the opportunity to be supported onto that elite trajectory is going to be here in a way that it wasn't before. For your kind of person that just wants to have a lovely time skateboarding, that vast range of different kinds of creative and community practices, having a go at filming, having a go at photography, all that is becoming increasingly possible. So you might have a skate coach, you might have a hub, a talent pathway, you might have a social skate organisation that will put you in touch with a photographer or a filmer that will get you involved in all those different assets of skateboarding. And starting that at a super early age will be so rad and potentially transformative for your teenage years. So it's a real good time to be getting involved in it.
Amazing, thank you, Chris. Any other questions from those in the room? No? Well, I'm aware we're a little bit over time. I hope you've learned some stuff, you've enjoyed that, and I really hope you can get involved in skateboarding one way or another through what we've spoken about. I think that's going to be a wrap for us then. So one last round of applause for Chris and Iain and coming all the way down to Brighton. Thank you very much for coming. Yeah, hopefully we'll be doing one of these again soon. I should mention just briefly on Wednesday, so this Wednesday coming, we're doing another one of these based around skateboarding and mental health with the Ben Ravers Foundation and Grassroots. So do tune in. Same time, Wednesday, Brighton Healthy Lifestyles team channel. Cool, thank you.
If anyone else wants to chat in a pub, I literally have nowhere else to go other than the travel.
There's no invite.